Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise today to contribute to the Child Wellbeing and Safety Child Safe Standards Compliance and Enforcement Amendment Bill 2021. And I want to acknowledge the member for Broadmeadows' contribution. I thought it was amazing and so compassionate when I heard his contribution. One of the very first constituent meetings I had as a newly elected member of this House was from a woman in her 70s. And she came to my office with her friend. She wanted to talk to me about her experiences as a child many years ago. And for her, it was important to get off her chest a pain that she had been carrying around for decades. I'm still amazed that it was me and in my office that she chose to share this trauma that she had quietly held on to. She needed to tell someone, and as a representative of the government, it was vital for her that she was heard. She bravely shared her story with me as a young girl in country Victoria, being abused by a priest who was meant to be taking care of her in her community and not taking advantage of her and her sisters. Her parents never believed her. She didn't want to take further action. She did not want compensation. The predator was long dead. She wasn't seeking anything from me. She just wanted to tell her story, to take some of the power back that was brutally taken away from her, from someone who was already in a position of power in that community. I'm still incredibly humbled by the strength of this remarkable woman. Her story that she entrusted to me is a constant reminder of the duty and responsibility that we have as members of this House to ensure that our state must have regulatory systems and structures in place to protect the most vulnerable. I did refer this woman off to a support agency. I'm proud to be part of this government and the duty it holds to our community to ensure mistakes of Victoria's past are no longer repeated. I'd like to thank the Minister and his staff and previous ministers, not just in his portfolio but across many portfolios, for the work they do to right previous wrongs and put those much needed structures and regulatory systems in place. I've risen in this House to contribute on other important legislation to prevent further abuse in our community. Previously, the Andrews Labor government conducted to expand mandatory reporting for child protection. That mandatory reporting refers to a legal requirement of certain professional groups to report a reasonable belief of child physical or sexual abuse to child protection. This has been across not just Victorian government agencies, but across many sectors in Victoria. In 2019, the Andrews Labor government expanded the list of reporters to include people in religious ministries, in line with recommendations from the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. That expansion broke the confessional seal, making it a crime to fail to report child abuse after we removed the exemptions for disclosures of abuse in religious confession. That strong woman who came to see me, who stood in my office and shared her story, also told me of the pain she carried, knowing that others had been abused by her tormentor. How many times had others in the community known about his despicable behaviour? Had he done this to others before her? Had this priest disclosed his depravity at confession? Could others have been prevented from this harm? These are questions she will never know now. But I, as a member of this House, all of us as members of this House, have a duty of care to continue these important reforms. The Andrews Labor government committed to reviewing the Child Safe Standards Scheme as part of its response to the Commonwealth's Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The review also found that the regulatory framework requires significant reform. The review made 15 recommendations that fall under 3 broad categories, and they are amending the standards to align with national principles for child-safe organisations, amending the Act to clarify who is responsible for regulating the standards and their functions, and amending the Act to give regulators contemporary monitoring and enforcement powers, including information sharing. The reforms in the bill implement 8 of the 15 recommendations of Victoria's review. The remaining recommendations are being implemented either administratively or through a legislative instrument. The bill will provide regulators of the standards with contemporary monitoring and enforcement powers to promote compliance and take action to address non-compliance. It will include a mechanism to clearly identify the regulator for each sector that is subject to the standards. This will reduce burden on entities, many of which currently deal with multiple regulators for the standards. It will improve information sharing between regulators so that non-compliance with the standards can be more efficiently and effectively identified and addressed. It will provide a statewide capacity building and leadership role for the Commission for Children and Young People, promoting consistent child safety outcomes across sectors. The review also found that there were regulators of the standards can effectively integrate the standards into existing regulatory frameworks, and this approach should be used. Therefore, the bill proposes to amend the Education and Training Reform Act 2006 to integrate the standards into that Act for the Education and Training Regulator, the Victorian Registration and Qualification Authority, and to provide the authority with additional powers to ensure it has a comparable set of monitoring and enforcement tools to the Commission and sector regulators. This bill also provides for the authority to have a similar set of monitoring and enforcement powers for the purpose of regulating registration approval and approval requirements under the Education and Training Reform Act. This includes the power to issue a notice to produce or accept an enforceable undertaking rather than limiting their use to monitoring and enforcing those standards. And the bill provides that sector regulators and the entities they are responsible for will be prescribed in regulations. Prescribing regulators will allow flexibility, particularly where the legal status of the regulator changes in the future. And to ensure there are no regulatory gaps, the bill provides that the Commission for Children and Young People will be the default regulator for any sectors not allocated a regulator. The need for this bill is to ensure comprehensive regulatory framework, which is required to ensure that organisations are supported to comply with the child safe standards by consciously and systemically creating conditions that promote child safety and prevent and properly respond to allegations of child abuse. A comprehensive regulatory framework is also required to address those organisations that fail to provide a safe environment for children and young people. The initiatives in this bill are significant. They build on existing protections. They will support the 50,000 organisations required to comply with the standards to make improvements to embed child safety into everyday thinking and practice. The Commission's statewide leadership role and new functions for regulators will support the diverse range of Victorian entities that provide services to children and young people to comply with those standards and promote consistent child safety outcomes across the Victorian state. And the reforms will strengthen the effectiveness of the Victorian Child Safe Standards Scheme and make organisations safer for Victoria's children and young people. This includes agencies such as schools, hospitals, child protection services, youth justice services, sports clubs, youth organisations, certain private sector businesses and, of course, religious bodies. The bill will make organisations safer for children and will prevent child abuse. These changes will build on and strengthen the scheme and consolidate Victoria's position as a leader in protecting children and young people. We can't go back and change things from the past. We can't always go back in time and shine a light on the darkness that operated in our institutions, in our schools and in our religious organisations. But we can and must improve the systems, the regulations and the structures for today. We must seek to shine that light on the darkness that abusers try to hide in now. We must ensure that no other person like that strong, elderly, inspirational woman that came to my office to share her story needs to come to an MP's office and retell their story of hurt, of trauma, because her parents would not believe her and she felt she had nowhere else to go. The parents believed that the perpetrator, the priest, over their daughters. It's for her and for other strong individuals that I will support strengthening our child protection regulations and will support this bill. For them and the children these amendments seek to protect, that I commend this bill to the House, and I wish the elderly woman that come to see me and tell her story the very best for her future. I know she's elderly, but I hope now that she's got it off her chest that she has a better future and relieves herself of all that pain. I commend this bill to the House.